Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our ongoing series on spiritual awakening. For the next 5 months, we will be producing a weekly episode on the 5 of the most important questions a seeker of truth can ever ask. Where am I? What am I? How did I get here? Where am I going? And how do I get there? This podcast series will provide you not only with those answers, but we will investigate many other important elements of a seeker's of truth's passage from the darkness of illusion to the light of truth. This passage is a transformation of the seeker from subconscious living to a conscious life. Now, these first 3 questions are exactly the same questions a patient with amnesia asks. Where am I? Who am I? And how did I get here? And that's what we are. Children of God with amnesia. And we've come from the design state, incarnating into a mundane state, excitedly going out into the world, getting entangled so much that not only have we forgotten where we came from and how to get back, we've forgotten who we are. What we are presenting are the teachings of Daskalos and the researchers of truth. And I feel that before we get into all the where are we, who are we kind of things, let's just talk a bit about who the man called Daskalos is and what the teachings of the researchers of truth are. To do that, we must go back 100 years, 800 years, all the way 3,500 years ago before we can really start our story. Specifically, the name Researchers of Truth was given to Daskalos students, the ones who trained and followed the system he first presented in 1919. However, in reality, that name really belongs to every person who thinks rationally. And we must say that the research of truth started with the caveman. Just think, that first caveman who looked up at the night sky and wondered, where am I? And he started thinking. Or maybe the first cave woman who saw herself in the water reflected and thought, who am I? Now the caveman and cave woman were living in a time where it was extremely dangerous. Lots of earthquakes, volcanoes, big beasts trying to eat them. And they looked around and thought, where am I? What is this place? And these are the same questions we are having today. Over time, the research of truth built and accumulated. Many different people from many different times and places added to it. Now we're going to skip over the early things of Lemuria and go right into Egypt 3,500 years ago, around the time of Moses. Now Moses isn't directly in our lineage, but the system he used, the Jewish teachings called Kabbalah, came from the same source as our teachings did, which is ancient Egypt. Now, when the Atlanteans came to Egypt, they brought higher knowledge. And you can see that if you just look at the architecture in Egypt. They were building small one-story buildings from mud bricks for a long time, and then suddenly there came a quantum leap with the building of the massive stone step pyramid of Saqqara. This was a huge change in construction techniques and obviously the consciousness of the people living in Egypt. And there is no evidence of a gradual step-by-step change that occurred in their building methods. We just see this big shift in the consciousness and building techniques with the appearance of the step pyramid at Saqqara. The Atlanteans came into this area and started what we call the ancient Egyptian civilization. And they brought with them a teaching and a practice called the symbol of life. It is a super advanced teaching practice, and the Egyptian hierophants learned it in the Egyptian mystery schools. Now, as you probably know, Moses was adopted by the daughter of the Egyptian pharaoh, so he became an Egyptian prince, and thus had the right to attend these mystery schools and learn about the powerful secrets of the symbol of life. He became an advanced master of the symbol of life teaching and practice. The Pharaoh of Egypt at that time became the grandfather of Moses. And the Pharaoh really, really liked Moses, but he could not give Moses his throne because Moses was adopted. He had to give it to his own bloodline. So he gave the throne to his son, who was semi-insane. And we've all heard the story of the conflict between Moses and this irrational Pharaoh. Moses had desired to inherit the throne and become the leader of the Egyptian people, but it was not possible. Thus he broke with Egyptian society, returned to his Jewish roots. And then he decided to lead the people, to take them out of Egypt and deliver them to the Promised Land. And it is written that he killed an Egyptian, which is symbolic. What he killed was the Egyptian he had become, that Egyptian prince in him. And when he led the Jews out of Egypt, he took the symbol of life teachings and practices with him. But he changed it. Moses took out of some of the Egyptian names that were in the centers on the symbol of life, that he called Kabbalah, and he gave it to the Jews. If you know something about the Kabbalah, you know what I'm talking about. About 100 years later, there was another pharaoh named Amanophus III, and he was a great pharaoh. Under his rule, he took Egypt and built it up to its highest pinnacle of development. This pharaoh had a son, Amanophus IV. When Amanophus became pharaoh, he took a wife. You've probably heard her name. It was Nefertiti. So with her and his nephew Koroman, they were practicing with this symbol of life teaching. Now at that time, the Egyptian religion had 42 different gods. All kinds of gods with animal heads and lots of priests, lucrative administrating for these gods. And they were getting money from the Egyptian people just to pray to their God for the needs of the people. And the priests were also paid to pray for the departed. Pharaoh Amanophis IV and his nephew Koroman and even Nefertiti were all hierophants practicing with this symbol. Then one day, during their practice, the Pharaoh has an ecstatic vision. He goes into a trance. In his revelation, he goes into this vision and realizes that all those gods are false. There's only one true spirit God. Afterwards, it was such a profound experience for him, he started a completely new religion in Egypt, dedicated to this one true spirit God he called Atan. Thereafter, he presented a monotheistic religion centered on this God, who was loving and merciful, and not angry and vengeful as the Jews had presented God. This was such a powerful transformational experience that when he came out of the vision, he changed his name from Amanophis IV to Ankh-Enatan. He changed his wife's name from Nefertiti to Merit Atan, and his nephew from Koroman to Koratan. And there was a big problem in the country because these 42 god religions were very well entrenched in Egypt, and their priests did not want to let go of their profitable positions. So the Pharaoh came out. He presented this new system of one true spirit God and declared the 42 Egyptian gods false, that they were only anthropomorphic gods created by humans and not the one true spirit God. Then it became like a war between truth and illusion, between the shadow and the light in Egypt. And Akhenaten was very wise. He just went off into the desert and built a brand new city in a new place that had never been built on before. And he called this new city Place of the Horizon, where they worshiped the one true spirit God. And of course, when you look in the history books or on the internet about it, they'll say he was worshiping the sun. But he wasn't worshiping the sun. He was worshiping life itself the sun represented, not the material sun. Because the material sun gave life to everything on earth, so the sun was a symbol for life itself. They continued to practice with the symbol of life teachings, which we will reveal at the end of this series. Akhenaten and the people that followed him established this new city dedicated to Atan. His followers were Egyptians, and there were also quite a few Israelis that had not gone with Moses on the Exodus to the Promised Land. The mother language of this group of Jews was Greek, not Hebrew, and they also spoke the Aramaic of the time. This group will eventually become the Essenes of Egypt. This was a very unique situation because Akhenaten, the king of Egypt, the most powerful leader and the most powerful country in the world, and he's had a direct experience of God. It was a golden time. People were happy in Akhenaten's new city. He was so kind to his people, and the people loved him, and he loved the people. But these 42 God religion priests were not happy at all, particularly the cult of Anubis, which was very, very strong. So they came up with this conspiracy, a plot to get rid of Akhenaten and his new one-God religion that was taking their people and their money away from them. Akhenaten's wife, Nefertiti, was barren. They had no offspring to continue the bloodline of the throne. And so the first part of the plot, the conspirators approached Akhenaten and said, "You need a bloodline to pass your throne on to, but you have no children." So to fix this, they cunningly suggested that Akhenaten adopt his other nephew, Tutankhamun, saying, "Tutankhamun's father had problems, was not doing well. Why don't you adopt the boy as your son, and then you can pass your throne down to him?" Not knowing their ultimate plan, this sounded like a good idea to Pharaoh Akhenaten. So he adopted Tutankhamun and sent his other nephew, Khoroton, to officiate it. Khoroton placed a large golden ankh on the child's chest, and with some other words of initiation, named him Tutankhaten. And they moved the child into the palace with the pharaoh. Then the next stage of the plot was to kill his other nephew, Khoroton, because this Hierophant was a major opponent to the 42 God religion and a major proponent to the establishment of the new one true spirit God religion. He was a huge threat to all the priests of the different old gods. So to stop him during a large, crowded, and noisy religious ceremony, they secretly stabbed him and buried him in the ground and covered up their crime. After that point, neither Akhenaten or anyone else knew what had happened to the pharaoh's most beloved nephew, Khoroton. Of course, Akhenaten was devastated by this loss, but he put his attention on the Tutankhaten and continued on. Then came the third phase of the plot, which was to kill Akhenaten himself. They poisoned him, but he didn't die. They poisoned him again, and he still did not die. They poisoned him 8 times, but he doesn't die. But then, on the 19th birthday celebration of Tutankhaten, Akhenaten comes out of his city to the birthday celebration, and at this time, the conspirators poisoned the pharaoh again and did him in. For the fourth and final phase of the conspirators rush in and take the 19-year-old Tutankhaten and prop him up on the throne and secretly gain control of Egypt. So that was the 4 steps of their plan to get rid of this one true spirit God and its leader. The next thing they did is they went out and destroyed stone by stone Akhenaten's new city. Then they went all around Egypt and chiseled off the name of Akhenaten everywhere it was found and destroyed most of his edifices. They changed Tutankhaten's name back into Tutankhamun and propped him up on the throne as a figurehead. Then, some years later, Tutankhamun, King Tut, mysteriously dies. The conspirators again go through Egypt, chiseling off the names of Tut. None of the pharaohs after that time, including Cleopatra, knew anything about Pharaoh Akhenaten or King Tut. And this is what happens to those who come to bring the light to the darkness of the world. It happens over and over and over. In Egypt, the conspirators immediately put one of their own up to become the first non-bloodline pharaoh. And now they've achieved full ownership of Egypt. And from then on, you can just see the once great Egyptian empire decline and die. The people who were following Akhenaten had to leave the great city dedicated to Aten. The pure Egyptians went back into Egyptian society, but the Greek-speaking followers go off into the desert, preferring to be alone in their own communities. And this group became the Essenes in Egypt, continuing their belief in the one true spirit God, and taking with them the teachings of Akhenaten, the teachings and practices of the Egyptian symbol of life. Well, let's just keep following these Essenes. They go throughout Egypt, they settle in Heliopolis, they come up to the Mediterranean, some of them. There are some in Cyprus, and go all around the Mediterranean and Asia Minor, and they keep those teachings alive. They preserve them, and they hide the secrets. Unlike the Jewish Kabbalah, the advanced knowledge regarding the symbol of life has been mostly kept from the public and only transmitted orally. It was a secret thing. This hidden knowledge was not given to the public. It wasn't until Daskalos reintroduced the symbol of life to his students that it became known publicly in whole as a system anyone can use to raise their consciousness and uplift their self-awareness. Yet some of these perennial teachings do show up in a fragmented way in other systems in past times and today. Now, the next part of our story comes about 500 years before the birth of Christ, at the time of the Buddha. Buddha had a disciple named Ananda, who had a photographic memory. Buddha loved Ananda very much, and Ananda loved Buddha very much. Before he died, Ananda goes up to Buddha and asks, "Are you God?" And he says, "No, I'm not God, but God himself will incarnate 500 years from now. I've shown you a way. He will be the way." Daskalos mentions this all the time. But you do not hear that mentioned in Buddhist teachings. I heard one time a student of Buddhism tell of that sutra before I met Daskalos and heard about the prophecy. And clearly Buddha's talking about Christ. So in this sense, we can say Buddha was the first to make a prophecy about the coming of Christ. Another one after that who revealed more truth was Socrates, and of course, his student Plato. Socrates brings the light, and then all the authorities in Athens accuse him of corrupting the youth of Athens, and they sentence him to death. Plato manages to get out of the situation alive, but Socrates did not. Every time somebody comes up to reveal more truth, more light, those under the shadows of illusion suppress it. And we can find it in our own life, too. Really, it's a principle of the phenomenon of life. It's a principle of duality. Next, in India, something like 30 years before Christ is born, there was a king, a great king named Maharaja Ram. He was a mystic, and he knew about this prophecy of Buddha. And he really wanted to know exactly where this child was going to be born. So he studies Buddhist prophecy through astrology, clairvoyance, and ultimately intuition. He's able to determine the location is going to be in Palestine. This mystic king was so advanced that he was able even to follow Mother Mary's development leading up to this great event. Mother Mary was from the Essene community in Palestine. They were not Jews. She was given by her parents at 3 years old to enter the temple of the Essenes and dedicate her life to pure service. When she came of age, she served the elderly and the sick. In the Essene community, a female committed this kind of lifelong service was known as a white dove of the heavens. And a male with this kind of dedicated service and high level of realization was known as a white eagle. As Mary grew, the Maharaja Ram was able to follow her development to the point where he knew when all this was going to happen. So he gave his kingdom away to his brother and mother to set off on this holy quest to find the birth of God. And along the way, he went through Armenia. At that time, Armenia was at war, civil war. There were two brothers fighting for the control of their own country. They were even twin brothers. And while in Armenia, the Maharaja Ram helped the brothers reconcile their differences, told them of this prophecy, and one of them, named Caspar, decided to join him. He too gave his kingdom to his brother and joined the Maharaja Ram on this holy quest. And they both set off. And as they were going through the desert on the way, they meet one of the 9 Bedouin kings in that area, called Baal-das-Osara, which means the servant of Osiris. And they tell him of their holy quest. And being a mystic also, the 3 kings decide that they are all going together to find the birth of the God-child. And of course, these are the 3 magi in the biblical story about the birth of Christ. And they do find the God-child just hours later after he was born, and not days later as it's written by historians. Each of the magi gave the Christ child their gifts. But when the Maharaja Ram knelt in front of the God-child, he took his sword out and broke it over his knee and laid it at the foot of the manger and cried out, "Hamelchior," which in his language meant, "We see God." And from that point on, he was known as Hamelchior, or Melchior, as it's written in the Bible. Daskalos had a replica of the sword and used it to initiate students into the circles for the researchers of truth by touching them on the shoulders, just like being knighted. For the researchers of truth, these 3 wise men were the modern-day founders of the researchers of truth system. When Bedouin king Baldassar in the Bible, gave Joseph and Mary 2 bedroom robes, he says he and the other 2 kings were able to discover the intention of King Herod of Judea to have every boy child killed, because Herod too was aware of this prophecy of the coming Messiah. Since King Herod was aware of the coming of the Messiah, the King of the heavens, he wanted to make sure there was no threat to his earthly kingdom. So he ordered all the recent born young male children, 2 years old and younger, killed. This is called the Massacre of the Innocents. However, because these 3 kings came and warned the Holy Family and gave them these robes, Joseph and Mary were able to sneak out of Israel disguised as Bedouins and went to Egypt in a caravan and stayed there with the Essenes in Heliopolis. Once Herod died, they came back to Israel, and you know the rest of the story and how that ended. Again, every time someone stands up to bring more light, the force of darkness attacks them. Some decades later, the Romans slaughtered the Jews and Essenes in the Mediterranean area. But some Essenes survive and continue to preserve both the true teachings of the one Spirit God and the symbol of life. The next player in the story is one of the early leaders of Christianity named Origen. This was way before Rome hijacked Christianity. Origen is considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, church fathers. Now, this was around 200 AD. Origen was a bishop of Alexandria, Egypt, and one of my favorite quotes of Origen is, "Every soul coming into this world is either strengthened by past victories or weakened by their past defects." This is amazing because this is showing us that Christianity was really teaching reincarnation from the beginning. But then at the 5th Council in Constantinople in 535, an ambitious emperor had the doctrine of reincarnation removed from the Bible. They confiscated and destroyed previous Bibles mentioning reincarnation. Then they issued new Bibles with the information on reincarnation removed. But you still can find some places in the Bible where it is mentioned that they missed. When Origen comes of age, he gets the diagram and the teachings on the symbol of life, and he makes some changes to it. Now he changes it from what the Egyptian system had. The old Egyptian system had names of Egyptian gods in the centers, and these centers represent the chakras on our body. But when Akhenaten began to work with the symbol of life later, he took out all those Egyptian names and just put in one symbol, the Ankh, which symbolizes life, both macrocosmically and microcosmically. So now comes Origen, who changes the symbol according to the book of Revelations of St. John, and he teaches it in his spiritual schools. We will describe that in some detail toward the end of the podcast series. Origen is so prolific, he wrote over 6,000 scrolls on these teachings, which included deeper understandings of the teachings of Christ, of the Essenes and of the one true spirit God of Ankanon. He was presenting the same teachings we are presenting today as the researchers of truth. Eventually, the Romans catch Origen, take him to jail, torturing and breaking just about every bone in his body, but they didn't want to kill him because they didn't want to make him into a martyr. So they release him in the end, and he lives for a few years. But in those years, he takes the symbol of life to Cyprus. And on Cyprus, he gives it to the Essenes living in Palestine. And the Essenes kept the teaching very purely. Much later, about 1120 A.D., the Knights Templar come along. And these holy warrior monks were protecting pilgrims from bandits on the way to the Holy Land. The Knights Templar were sponsored by king and pope and became very, very wealthy. They get so wealthy by their service to king and country, they are able to buy Cyprus from Richard the Lionheart for about 100,000 gold Byzantiums, which would have been $1.5 million. The Knights Templar then established their headquarters in the castle of Nicosia. During their time on Cyprus, the Essenes give the Knights Templar the symbol of life. And these guys are do-or-die kind of people, so they guard the secrets of the symbol of life and protect it with their life. Daskalos said the Knights knew the secrets of the symbol of life, teaching and practices. But in Daskalos' teaching of the symbol of life, he's only given us the keys to the secrets. And we must use these keys ourselves to open the door to the secrets. And as you probably know, on Friday the 13th in 1307, these warrior monks become inconvenient to the Pope and King, so they have them all slaughtered, and it starts on Friday the 13th. That's why we have the superstition about Friday the 13th. After their demise, we don't know exactly what happens to the symbol of life teachings after that, but then some of the perennial teachings show up in a group called the Cathers in the south of France in the late 12th century. The name Cather is from the Greek language, and it means the pure. They exist for a while, but they get into a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church and Pope because of sex. Unlike the Church, they believed sex was a natural expression for humans and was engaged in for pleasure, not just procreation. Unlike the Catholics, the Cathars practiced birth control and elevated the value of women to be equal to men. This, as you can imagine, did not sit well with Pope and Church, who militantly enforced their idea that sex was only for procreation. The Pope then orders the Cathars to be tortured, burned alive, and all of their property confiscated. And again, the public part of the teachings disappeared for a while. And then next we see it surface in the 1500s. The Rosicrucians start presenting fragments of these teachings, going all the way back to Ankanon. And then the two brothers who were leaders of that group start fighting inside with each other. I don't know how far the fighting went, but it went so far as to break their connection with the higher source that was feeding them information. So now we jump forward to the late 1800s, to the Theosophical Society and Madame Blavatsky. She had some mystical abilities, but also human weaknesses. She was able to perceive and see the structure of an atom with its nucleus and rotating electrons. 6 years or so before Danish physicist Niels Bohr even theorized about the atomic structure. And now, as we all know, what she saw then looks exactly like what science confirms now. She was bringing a lot of information in, and Blavatsky and her group were attributing the information they received as coming from ascended masters of the White Lodge, the White Brotherhood, they called them. And in Theosophist Charles Ledbetter's book, he speaks of these matters, as well as those of them who were incarnated on Earth. In the first edition of the book, which was in 1908, he tells you there were these masters on Earth. There's a big group of them, but only 7 of them are on Earth at any point in time. 4 of them never come out to the public, but 3 do. One, he said, was in Syria, and Daskalos confirms this one, who goes by the name Hilarion. Ledbetter even stated that one of these advanced masters was going to be born in Cyprus in 4 years. 4 years later, Daskalos was born on Cyprus in 1912. So here we are seeing how these teachings partially show up in the public, but then all would disappear and then resurface again and go down and come up. The degrees of truth are revealed, and then they get knocked down, but it never goes away. It's like an eternal flame that continues on and on. So now, these people were presenting something of the truth of these perennial teachings, but often they did it in a stupid way, mixing their own egoism, which makes them go astray. Rudolph Steiner was initially a member of the Theosophical Society, but when they start to go astray, Steiner splits off and starts his own system and goes his own way. Eventually, in the Theosophical Societies, the leaders start fighting among themselves, and the fight escalates to the point of them going to court to fight over the name, the White Brotherhood. That was a deal breaker for the masters of the White Brotherhood. They decided the name White Brotherhood has now been spoiled and cannot be used anymore. They changed the name to the Researchers of Truth. Now, here's an interesting thing to notice. You see how the threat to spiritual teachings is no longer an external threat like it was before. Now the threat to spiritual groups and teachings come from inside the group itself. Always before, the attacks had come from outside. Now we see people in different spiritual systems attacking, depowering, and breaking up their own group. The true parts of all these teachings we just mentioned could be considered predecessors of our lineage. Mankind's understanding of the true teachings has been evolving over time with much, much more new information revealed by Daskalos than ever before. Now it comes forward in the teachings of the Researchers of Truth today. In fact, I want to quote something to you from St. Augustine from around 400 AD on this point. He was one of the great Christian fathers after Origen, and he stated, "The identical thing we now call the Christian religion existed amongst the ancients, and has not been lacking from the beginning of the human race, leading up to the coming of Christ in the flesh, from which moment on the true religion, which already existed, began to be called Christian." People think of all these past spiritual events, stories, religions, past, as different. But really, it's one thing evolving over the long periods of time. Can you imagine what it's going to be like in 1,000 years from now? But really, evolving is not the right word, because the absolute truth is one. It has no degrees. It does not increase. It does not evolve. What evolves is our understanding of the truth, which is just to say, it's our ascension up the ladder of relative truth towards the absolute truth. This brings us to Dr. Steliano Soteslis, who was commonly known as Daskalos. His story is, as you probably heard before, starts on Cyprus, and I'll just say something about it briefly. Daskalos was born fully self-aware. He remembers all the details of his birth, everything that happened in the room when he was born, and what the people were saying to each other. Then, when he was 3 years old, he tells his fathers these details only his father knew. Like when his mother went into labor, his father ran out into the rain to the barn to hitch up the horse and carriage to go get a doctor for the birth. As his father did this, he tore his cape on a nail in the barn, and only the father knew that. So hearing his 3-year-old son tell him all this just shocked the father. His father pleaded, "Please don't tell anybody these things. Just keep it quiet." This was old world Cyprus, and revealing such thing about the young Daskalos' ability would cause problem with the people, and especially the church. So it was just best not to speak about it. But one day at school, when Daskalos was 7, his teacher forces him to solve a math problem Daskalos had not prepared for. He wrote his answer on the class blackboard. But when the director of the school sees it, he doesn't think it looks like the writing or the work of a 7-year-old kid. So he has the young Daskalos come to his office, and he starts talking to him about his answer. Daskalos innocently, fully reveals that he's connected with ascended masters who guide him and gave him the answer to this problem. Now the director starts testing him by asking him questions way beyond a 7-year-old's knowledge base. And each time he answers every one of them perfectly. The director gets very excited about discovering this little mystic, but because the director himself was secretly studying esoteric mysticism. In secret, because this kind of study was prohibited by the church and could have gotten you excommunicated and shunned by the Cypriot Society in 1919. Next, the director brings university professors to talk and question the young master Daskalos. They ask him questions in different language, and they have him translate parts of a Latin Bible into Greek. And every time they question him on mathematics, algebras, and things beyond a 7-year-old's abilities, he answers them perfectly correct. They were so amazed by his responses and got so excited they wanted to form a study group around the boy Daskalos. Daskalos says okay, and he goes home and he gets permission from his father to go to the principal's house every night for study. But his father thinks that he's getting tutoring by the director of the school, but actually he's tutoring the director. Just imagine this little master sitting in a chair. His feet aren't even touching the floor, with all these college professors and highly educated people asking him question after question in different languages. Daskalos could even give the answer in the language they asked the questions. They were all astounded. So they come every week for Daskalos' lessons. Maybe 20, 30 of them in this little house in Cyprus. Finally, Daskalos reminds them that this is a very serious study, and before going any further, he insisted that they make the 7 promises of the researcher of truth. He said, if you're going to study this, you must make these promises to yourself before you continue. They are not an oath. You should never make an oath. People break oaths, and that creates guilt in them, which is harmful. However, the 7 promises are not oaths to other people. They are promises you make to yourself. So if you don't live up to a promise the first time, and of course you won't, you try harder next time, and slowly, in this way, it starts to transform you from the inside out. The 7 promises are: I promise to myself to serve at all times and all places absolute beingness whom I wholeheartedly belong. I promise to myself to be ready at all times and in all places to serve the divine plan. I promise to myself to make good use of the divine gifts of thought and word at all times, in all places, and under all circumstances. I promise to myself to endure patiently, without complaining, all forms of trials and tribulation which the most wise divine law may bestow upon me. I promise to myself to love and serve my fellow human beings sincerely from the depths of my heart and soul, no matter what their behavior may be toward me. I promise to meditate and contemplate daily absolute beingness with the objective of total coordination of my thoughts, desires, words, and actions with its divine will. I promise to myself to investigate and check every night whether all my thoughts, desires, words, and actions are in absolute harmony with the divine law. And these are not symbolic things. These are some of the most important things we can ever do to raise our consciousness and uplift our awareness. Whatever problems you face in your life, one or more of these promises will give you the guidance on what to do to overcome it. These promises will carry you through if you can live by them. But unfortunately, right now, most people in the world think, well, I love my fellow human beings if they agree with me or if they are nice to me. but the promise is to love and serve no matter what their behavior is. Well, Daskalos was the epitome of living these promises. He had people who had killed him in a previous life who came to him for healing in this current life. Did he reject him because they killed or hurt him in a previous life? No, of course not. He tried to heal them with as much effort and sincerity as he did for a dear friend. So that is a little bit about the system for the research of truth that Daskalos started when he was 7. And he taught from that point on until he passed over, repeating these teachings over and over. Now, I met him 69 years after this point, at the age of 76, but he was still so strong. He was like a mighty river, and every day he would just pour out these teachings, day after day, week after week, year after year. But unfortunately, nobody really kept transcripts of the old stuff. We've got about 500 of his lessons from the 90s that were recorded, and we have about 500 old Greek handwritten lessons somebody took notes during a class in the 70s. But before that, there are no transcriptions of what he said. Still, what we do have is so massively broad and deep. What has been released to the public of his works maybe is only 10% of it. You cannot believe how much rich and vitally important spiritual teachings Daskalos has left us. He was the most prolific spiritual speaker and writer. And his work ranged from the simplest things of just how to be happy in your life now to the highest level of things of like going beyond even the human form. I've been working with Daskalos in the teachings for over 30 years, and I found no edge, no bottom, no top, nothing. It just goes on and on and on. It's like a lifetime supply of some of the most advanced spiritual teachings that has ever been released on the planet. And you can read Daskalos' basic teachings over and over and constantly get new guidance and insights. I have read those basic outer circle lessons maybe 10 or 12 times, studying them. Then I might go back 5 years later and I always find deeper understandings from the same exact material. And that's because these teachings are literally alive. They are the living word. And because it's alive, it responds to you wherever you are in life when you read it. So you will always hear new things that will teach you and guide you constantly. This is how these perennial teachings, these eternal teachings, have been developing and growing over time. Now, for the first time, they are presented more completely as a system for the research of truth. In the next episode, we're going to continue our investigation into the question of where we are as we speak about the creation of the material universe and its etheric counterpart. In this next episode, we'll travel back across time and space and witness the creation of a three-dimensional universe, our planet Earth, and its corresponding etheric world. We will witness the development of Earth in details across vast eons of time and disclose more on the nature of the etheric energy and its vast field of potentiality scientists are now calling zero-point energy. I hope you can join us for this next episode.